My name is Mariko. This is my Twitter handle.
I'm Suze. This is my Twitter handle as well.
So we are both from New York.
Yes.
We flew in. We are a little jet-lagged. Our laptop is a little jet-lagged. But we are both JavaScript engineers who use JavaScript in weird places. So Suze does a hardware with JavaScript. Like I don't even know what you did. That screen. What is it?
Frame buffers on OLED screens, so you can send cats to your screens. That was the only reason why I wrote it.
That's awesome. And I do a little hardware-ish, but more like image software where I make software to make a knitting pattern, which then gets sent to AD's knitting machine. So those are our kind of like hobbies. So we're a really good friend from New York. In New York, there's a lot of meetups. We basically see each other almost every week. And we became really good friends over the 2 years of knowing each other. So last year, almost a year ago, she said to me at one of the meetup, do you want to work on project together? And I'm like, without thinking anything, I was like, heck yes, let's do it. But we kind of sat on the idea of what to work on. We decided that we're going to do something together, but we didn't really decide on what to work on. And we kind of like fiddled with the idea of like sending like, things to each other so that it's more collaborative. But then I came across this tweet from my friend Jan, who said, current status firmware update to the fax machine. Which, by the way, if you see Jan in person, you should ask him about that incident. It was amazing. And I don't think I can do the justice to explain how amazing this incident was, so you should definitely ask him. But one of my good friend, Maureen, replied to that Jan's tweet saying, is fax machine still in use? I have a secret wish that we all own one and send each other little drawings to it all day. So when I saw this tweet, I was immediately sent this link to this tweet and asked Suze, fax machine on DM, and she immediately said, love it. So we're going to explain what fax machine means.
Right, so we kind of had to narrow it down a little bit more from there. So we came up with like a plan, but also some constraints to go along with it. So I'm going to try and walk you through that as clearly as I can, because it is like still an art creative project at the same time. So what we wanted to do was, theoretically, we had these machines that were able to take in some kind of like binary file format, right? So it could accept some form of file that either Mariko sent to my machine or I sent to Mariko's machine. It would be able to then decode that or decrypt it, and then it would either manipulate that data, or it would just straight spit the data out as it was intended. And then what we wanted to do was kind of like not cheat either. So if you sent these files, we didn't want to use the operating system to preview the file. We didn't want to just kind of do things the traditional way. We wanted to use just Node.js in order to like build the machine from scratch. And so then we decided that because there were kind of machines, we wanted to create like little encapsulated things. So instead of something running on our large laptops that are very powerful, we decided to go with a small machine such as a Raspberry Pi. So these Raspberry Pis can be very isolated, and the only code that we're running on it is the actual machine code that we're writing in Node.js. Then we decided to put another constraint on top of that. And so we wanted to choose the medium through which the JavaScript actually runs, so like the environment. And so Mariko decided that she was only going to run her JavaScript in a browser environment, so she couldn't use the command line or run JavaScript in any other way. And then I decided that I was going to do it completely without a graphical user interface, so not even just a browser, but I was just going to be using the shell only on the Raspberry Pi. So all I had to work with was running Node.js on the command line.
And name of the project?
Yes. So we decided to call the project Makealike, because Makealike in Latin is actually facsimile. So if you've always wondered where the fax machine comes from, it comes from the word facsimile, which is Latin for make-alike.
Yeah.
So we loved that so much because we are kind of alike, and we did sort of want to make these machines that might be alike but might actually end up diverging in how we actually handled the data on each side.
I think it was like one weekend in January, we were just like, what do we call this thing? We like, fax machine is not quite good, and we just like stumbled upon Wikipedia,
Yeah.
and it said like facsimile is make-alike, and I'm like, we like immediately said like, yeah.
Yeah, that's it. I think we ended up on a Wikipedia black hole that day a little bit.
And in order to make it kind of like a collaborative project, but like having like a coherent thing, we decided to like a journal. So I will do this thing, I'll write about my thing, you do that thing, do that thing and do this thing. It's not doing good job. Like the jet lag is kicking in. So we log everything that we did and kind of like keep the journal so that we have a log of what we did. And that's what we want to share today.
So we have, I think, like 1 or 2 journal entries each to present to you today on what happened.
Yeah. So my section of my journal, so I decided to call it Code Journal and title, Let's Be a Binary Detective. So as I mentioned, I have this hobby of sending data to knitting machine, and here's the kind of data that I'm sending to my knitting code. I freaking love looking at hex and binary. So looking at this, I can immediately tell how big the size of the pattern is and how busy like the pattern is, like how many color sets are used. So these are the kind of things that I did previously. So when we decided that she's going to send me some binary data and I need to like decode it, I was like, this is exactly the kind of thing I want to do and I like to do. So I was really excited. I was like, I'm going to be a detective, do that thing again, not for the knitting machine, for the Raspberry Pi or browser again. So Sue sent me data over GitHub. We use like a shared GitHub repo. She said she pushed the data, so I pulled it, and just out of habit, I just typed open dot, and then this happened. So as Sue mentioned, one of the constraints that we set each other was do not use OS, like do not use like already existing thing. We do our hard work, but. I just like saw the thing, and the funny thing is that I thought you did like something really clever, that like you had this like actual data, but then like somehow found a way to kind of like trick me
and fake the thumbnail.
Yeah, fake the thumbnail. So I immediately tweeted like, "How did you do that?" And then you replied to me saying, "No, I ruined it." And then I realized that that was actually the file. So damn computer, it's so helpful. So I couldn't like just say to Sue like, "Hey, so like computer kind of sold my project, and that's my journal entry." So she sent me new file and made sure that computer cannot sniff it. So the new file came in the format like this.
I put a dot text on it. That solved the problem.
Oh, that's it.
Yeah, that's what solved it.
Okay.
But I had to pick a new picture, which I was heartbroken about because it took me hours to choose that specific cassette tape image. So
yeah. So you sent me text file. Computer seemed to not know what that file is. You only gave me hint that that was image file, right? So okay, this is clearly not an image file. Good to go. So the first thing I tried to do was like, what if I misinform HTML element? And what I mean by that is that what if I append that text file? So far at OS level, OS thinks that it's a text file. What if I append that to the source attribute of the image? Are they going to be upset, and are they going to log like some error message so that I can like investigate where to go? Well, I wrote that in my HTML and loaded on the browser, and then this happened. Again, browsers are so helpful. So it immediately gave me the image, even though I thought I was loading text file, right? So this is one thing I really like about working with web browser and web. It's like so resilient and so like helpful to my mistake of appending text file to image file, or like it's really good, but like too helpful for this project. So at this point, I was like, okay, the dream of being binary detective is defeated by browser and computers. I'm just gonna instead be browser anthropologist and look at the habitat of HTML elements, observe, and then like discover like how the hell HTML is doing this. So one thing I tried first was that, okay, computers seem to figure that out, that the text file is an image, but I also like knew that was image, so I appended the image element. What if I like appended to other media tag, so audio or video, Is that going to play like a random music based on the text file? Is that going to play like kind of like artsy video based on that? So I tried that.
That would have been so cool.
Yeah, I would have loved it, like if the browser was helpful in that way. But browser seemed to know that the text file that I was loading is definitely an image format, because when I tried out 3 tags, the audio and video did not play. It was broken player, but image still loaded. So that means that the browser knows, like, browser is reading something that is beyond metadata. When you put input file element, you can easily find the metadata of that file. Like if you write those code, then it gives you the file name and file type. And on the input file level, that's what browser knows. But when it comes to load it, it seems like it's looking at underneath, like what's actually in that file. So I was like, how can I look at what's actually in my file in my JavaScript? Well, you can use thing called file leader, which is part of the web API. So you create a file leader, and then you attach onload event handler. So in this case, I was just console logging whatever the result is. And you can actually read the file by calling the method. So in this case, you can use read as data URL and pass the file from the input element. And what you get is base64 representation of that file, right? And the file leader have like a different methods to read how to read those files. So another one is read as a text. Another one is read as binary string. And the another one is read as array buffer, which is only one that can't really console log. And I think in the Jan's talk, he touched it a little bit. Array buffer, as I understand it, is kind of like masterpiece at the museum. So it's just an allocation of the memory, right? Data in the memory. But you can't really touch it. You can't manipulate it because, you know, as Jan explained, like you have to like tell them like which endian are you reading? Like how should we read this memory data? So in order to interact with that array buffer, you need to go to the museum and look at that memory allocation, and then you know either like create your own version of pixel art, or you like what do you call it, the copy, or missing the English word. Anyway,
like a clone?
Clone, yes.
Right.
Clone the image. So that's something that you would do. In code speak, it's like casting to the type array or data view. So again, the code, you read as an image array buffer, but then on the onload, inside you cast it into typed array, and then you can access that data that's in the typed array. And in this case, it returns 42. So in investigating this, I was like, I don't really understand array buffer. I was talking to my friend and now colleague Jake Archibald about this, and I was also curious, now that I can read it as a buffer, can I like progressively stream and kind of like have a loading bar and things? And he got into like, experimenting, and he also got curious about it, and he actually found a bug in browser and filed it, which was kind of amazing. I didn't know that I would encounter browser bug in this thing, but apparently the way the spec is defined has a vulnerability to memory leak.
That's
so
awesome. I didn't know that happened. That's so cool.
Yeah, so I pinged him right before we go on stage for another conference, and he was like, oh, by the way, the thing you asked me, I kind of investigated it, and here's like 3 different browser bugs that I found. I'm like, thank you. So I kind of experimented with this technique, and I used like a read as text. And as I read as text with like a whole bunch of files to see what's the behavior of those elements, the files are, I kind of noticed that the beginning of the file always has hint to file extension. At this point, being great web developer, I was like, what if I just, use regex? But then also being great web developer, I was like, that is never a good idea. So I kind of got me thinking like, but browser is doing this, and all of the browser, cross-browser, is doing the same behavior. How should I do this? Is there anywhere like manual how to do it? There is. It's called web standards. So beginning of this conference, yesterday, Mike said you should lead the standards, and I can recommend you should lead the standards. So I kind of Googled how to lead file type standards. Maybe it didn't even put the standards. And I discovered there is a defined standard to lead how to lead files. And it's called MIME sniffing standard. I love that standard name is like sniffing standards.
By the way, I had no idea you were going to go this deep on the image.
So in introduction of the standards, I'm not going to read this whole paragraph, but it describes exactly the problem that I had, which was sometimes content type that comes down on the wire is lie. Like sometimes the malicious attacker sets the content type as an image and then send a script file to you, and then browser might execute that, and that's a problem. And you need to check or verify that is this file exactly the content type that the server is saying. So they kind of stated the exact problem that I had, which was trying to see the difference between the file type and the actual file format. So inside of that specification, there is how to lead image section. So I lit it because I needed to implement it. So I lit it, and I'm like, let the byte sequence to be matched be the byte sequence to be matched. And I'm like, hold on a second. I've been studying English for 10 years, and I consider myself decent on English. And I'm like, is there any specific English class that I missed in school to how to lead web standards? So I started complaining to friends who works on HTML standards. And many people who work on the standard gave me this advice that, oh, that's totally understandable, because standard specification is a particular dialect of English that compiles to C++. And I'm like, okay, so this standard spec is targeted to computer, not me, but I'm going to lead it. So I got to coding, and I somehow got to working code. So this is the final result of what I built. Whatever the file, if video plays, whatever the file you give, whether it's text file or not, my code evaluates, oh, it's an image, and appending it to image element. Oh, it's audio file, appending it to audio file. So it's doing a little bit of sniffing, MIME time sniffing, to verify what the file actually is and put it in there. It's not perfect because I could not understand the standards text. And then also there's no way to verify, there's no test. So, but it seemed to be working. I'm not really sure. And I talked about that I am not really sure on stage 3 weeks ago about I'm still trying to lead the standard spec. My code is not perfect, but seems to be working. Then something magical happened. 2 hours later, I get off the stage. I get the email from GitHub notification saying Dominic De Nicola filed an issue on MIME's next standard repo, saying in her JSConf talk, Kosaka pointed out that this is a bit ridiculous. We can do better. Not only that, he actually edited the spec and made a pull request. And as you can see, it's got merged. So somehow, by complaining on stage, I convinced the editor of the spec to edit it and actually change it 2 hours later, which was kind of cool. But then, last week, I woke up to this tweet by somebody called Gordon, saying that in which Mariko tears apart the word I wrote 5 years ago in front of our Europe. And then he followed up to the tweet saying, here are some historical documents. And he snapshotted the notes that he took when he was actually writing that spec. And if you you can find that tweet.
Yeah.
You can totally see how he was thinking about how to describe this algorithm. And I felt so bad. I didn't mean to be mean or anything. I was just explaining, I cannot understand this.
Public shaming on stage works, but maybe have other side effects.
So this was the original text. with, let the byte sequence to be matched sequence. And then here's the edited version, became a lot cleaner. And now I actually understand what I should do based on this specification. One more cool thing, and then also like super imposter syndrome moment, was that the acknowledgement was also edited with my name. The thing is, all I did was I tried to lead the spec. Didn't even got to finish leading it, and talk to people about that I didn't get it. But I don't know, it feels really weird. But as Mike said at the beginning of this conference, leading standards is great. And then from this experience, I learned that behind the web browser, it's easy to shout out to console, why is it not working? Or just looking at the beautifully edited spec and thinking that some mythical creature called W3C gave me this text, or what W3C gave me this text. But it's actually people who define and write those words to communicate how browsers should behave, which was kind of cool. So now I'm going to pass on to Seuss about her bit of the project.
Before I do that, I've got a pop quiz for you. You never said what format the file was that I sent you. What kind of image was it?
It was bitmap.
Yes. Okay.
Wait, what is it?
Yeah, it was a bitmap. Yeah.
Okay.
Did you like the picture?
Yeah, I did. It had a weird flute on the screen.
Yeah. There's more details with the next files that I'm going to
Yeah, so Sue gave me that, she's giving me a sequence of file, and it's actually a secret message that I need to decode based on what kind of file comes in. But I have no idea what the relation between that computer file and then cassette tape file, so if you have any clue, please let me know.
It's a secret. Cool. So my machine diary starts at trying to bring up some of the building blocks because I don't have a graphical user interface, and Mariko is sending me files, and I have to somehow kind of deal with that. So I'm using only the command line. So I'm pretty much using commands such as this. And so if you've never typed this out before, this is actually using what's called a pipe. And the pipe is the character in the middle. And so typing PS will give you a list of it's a Unix command for listing the processes that are running on your computer. And then you can then pipe that into another command, and it can take the results of that and do something with it. So here I could grep for a certain word, because grep allows me to kind of filter on certain kind of keywords that I might want to search on. So an example of that happening, just so, in case you've never done that before, I'm just going to make sure that that runs. Nope. Oh,
It did.
It was running?
Yeah.
There we go,
Yeah.
Sorry. So when you type that in, I'm listing my processes, and then I'm grepping for bash. And what I love about about using this command is that you always also get the process that ran where you were actually grepping for bash in the first place. So it's kind of this weird circular thing. And so what's actually happening is there is a pig called pspig, and he is basically saying, hey, to grep turtle, I have a list of processes for you. And he is basically saying, hey, thanks for that. I am only going to list the processes that contain the word bash.
I noticed that you use Android emoji,
Yeah.
the cute version.
Yeah.
And I
it's
took
really
the liberty
cute.
of editing this file because it was on my computer. Because the new emoji is this.
No! It's not as cute, is it?
I know, right?
I'm really sad.
Yeah, I just really wanted to tell you on stage.
Okay.
I know you care this pig so much. So.
Yeah. I mean, look, he's very helpful Pia. He's really cute. So that's sort of how pipes work, right? And I sort of thought pipes are going to be really, really useful to me because I only have the command line, and I want to kind of write my stuff modularly so that whatever data is coming in, I can kind of pipe it through lots of things and transform it. And I thought that's sort of what I want my machine to be. It's sort of this fluid kind of thing. And so the first thing I wrote was just something very rudimentary, and that was to play with pipes in Node. So if you've never played with them before, you can actually work with streams in Node. And this command here simply takes the standard in from the actual process that you're running, and it will just pipe that straight to standard out, which in the case of like working with the terminal, that will just console log out the results. And so I thought, okay, that's cool, but that's not super useful because I already have pipes in Unix. So I thought, what is one command that people kind of pipe a lot? And that command is cat. So I thought, what would it be like if I created my own Node.js version of cat, or at least just the main functionality, because there are like a lot of things that you can do with it, with flags and stuff. And so I ended up thinking about, well, what does cat do? So cat can take a file, for example, a file.txt. You give it to cat. Cat will then just basically take it and read it back out again, right? So that's sort of what I wanted to do. But the magic is when you can take the output of something and you can pipe that directly into another thing, which is kind of where you can do cool
Can I
stuff.
just interrupt? So
Yeah.
like I've seen this slide before, and then every time it's just like amazed me that what you put cat to say.
Well, there's a lot of drama in the JavaScript industry
Yeah.
about semicolons, so I thought the semicolon deserves its own fairy tale.
Okay,
so
great.
this is a work in progress. It's
Okay,
gonna,
great.
it's going to get better. So this ended up being like a simplified version of cat. So I'm requiring the file system from the standard Node library. I'm actually being helpful to myself and reminding myself that if I don't supply a third argument, which is the file name, that I need to do that. I am then just taking that file path and then creating a read stream and piping that to the standard out. So you can see there that I used my previous pipe, but this time I'm actually kind of like putting something out. And I thought, whatever file Mariko sends me, I can use that cat command to display it. So in the end, this is sort of what it looks like. I can just call that because I made it an executable file, and it outputs just like a text file, like that. So that was sort of the first building block that I wanted to make so that I could kind of work with it with all of the different files that Mariko sent me. But then, my second journal is covering when she actually opened a pull request with some data. So I got my first piece of data. Mariko opened the pull request, and then she very cheekily merged it within 5 minutes. And I didn't even
I was
get
like,
to
I
do
can't wait.
And I thought, well, this is a creative project. This is a personal thing. We can totally break all the rules on GitHub as well. So Mariko gave me only one clue about this file, and that the data is some form of audio. So Mariko got to work with an image that I sent her. Mariko told me that she sent me audio. But it did arrive mysteriously missing a file extension. And it was a little bit easier for me to not accidentally open it, mostly because I didn't have a graphical user interface to begin with, but also I was so paranoid about spoiling the surprise for myself that I ended up just kind of being very careful about what I was typing on the Raspberry Pi. So when I ran cat on this file, this is sort of what it ended up looking like. And I was like, OK, there's a lot of stuff in here that I don't quite understand, but there's stuff that I can already start with. So if you have a look at the top in the corner, I started seeing things that were like little clues as to what's going on in this file. So the first thing I noticed was that there is an ID3 tag in here. And ID3 tags were a standard that were created for MP3 files. So I knew immediately, OK, this is an MP3 file. I was slightly offended that you sent me compressed audio data because I'm used to PCM, but that's OK. Well, I can work with this. I can work with it.
Well, next thing you get to how lazy I was.
The next thing I saw was what's this GarageBand tag going on here? I was like, did Mariko make me a song?
Yeah, so I had the grand plan of learning web audio API and then just coding my audio from so that I don't leave any trace
you fancy.
of the things.
Yeah.
And then I ran out of time, and you already sent me 2 files, and I felt really guilty that I didn't send the files. So I just opened that GarageBand.
I think I was pull requesting a storm up. Yeah, and then the next thing I saw was this kind of end iTunes. There's a lot of these kind of iTunes-related tags. So that it's either GarageBand uses some form of it shares some kind of encoding engine that iTunes has, or you opened it in iTunes before you sent it, something like that. But it ended up writing in there. So I thought that's not super important at the moment. But now I know that it's an MP3 made in GarageBand, something iTunes. And the last bit was not as important. So of course, when you know what file format it is, you know what the next step is to decode it, right? You read a paper about decoding MP3s. You go down a rabbit hole for a few days straight, and you learn about how the file is put together. So I learned all about how there are different frames of music data, and the frames can differ in whether or not, in the amount of compression, there are headers that are going on, and things like that. And so I was able to read through the entire paper and implement a MP3 decoder in Node. And then what I wanted to do was, I thought, maybe I could also just apply fast Fourier transforms so that I could get the frequencies out of the song and do some really cool stuff with it. So then I implemented fast Fourier transform in Node, and yeah, no, I didn't do any of that. I wanted to, but I realized that even though I would have learned a lot, it was kind of taking me off the creative path of why we were kind of doing this in the first place.
I kind of like that, without planning, both of us, went through the path of leading papers and specifications instead of asking somebody.
We're we got this, we can implement the whole thing from scratch, it's fine. I like that we both productively had a bit of a moment where we knew that was maybe not a good idea. And so I can cheat even though I don't have a browser. There is a Web Audio API audio context node module that I can use. And there is also a module called Speaker, which can hook directly into the drivers, the audio drivers of the operating system I'm using. So I was using Raspbian, which is a form of Linux on the Raspberry Pi. So that did actually work. And I then had to kind of do what you normally do with the Web Audio API. You create a function to play a sound, and you pass a buffer around, and then you connect that to a destination, which was the Speaker module. And then, of course, because this is sort of me running a whole bunch of chained commands, I created a brand new file, and you essentially supply it a file name of the audio file, and then it will decode it and then start playing the sound. And so in the end, this is what the command looked like when I ran it on the command line. And honestly, because I didn't cheat or anything, I was running this over and over and over again, and then one time that I run it, all of a sudden I heard this.
Fine piece of music.
Cool song, Mariko.
By me.
Cool song.
Produced on GarageBand. I'm so proud.
Artisanally created.
Yes.
And I thought, I don't know what this is. And then 30 seconds later, I had this epiphany, and I was like, wait. 2 months ago, Mariko sent me a video on Facebook, and the video was this. So hopefully that will play. Yep. And this looks like GarageBand, or some kind of audio program.
Beautiful.
It's super cool. I've seen a really rude one that spells rude words too, and it's really awesome. Yeah, I'll send it to you later.
That's awesome.
I couldn't put it in the slides because it's really rude. Cool. So Mariko, I thought she's hidden a picture in the GarageBand file. How am I going to find this? Because I only have the command line, and I can't view images, and I don't have anything. I need to get the frequencies out, but I didn't have time to implement the fast Fourier transform to pull them out, and I thought, oh my God, what am I going to do? Eventually, I figured out that maybe if I ran headless Chromium, that's technically still not cheating because I'm not using a graphical user interface.
Yeah.
It was headless. That maybe I could write normal HTML and JavaScript and then run it in the background and kind of try and get something back out of that process. So I ended up using a module called Headless Chromium. I had to then pipe the GUI out into Virtual Frame Buffer, which is a really, really cool command line app. You should totally use it if you have to do something as weird as this. After that, I then ran a local host with a HTML file with a canvas and an audio element in it, and then I was then able to create some JavaScript that would play the sound, analyze the frequency data, and then kind of plot it over a timeline, similar to how those notes in GarageBand were. Because I thought, if I can just plot all the frequencies, an image is totally going to emerge, and I'm going to see what that was. And so the way that I got the image back out to the command line once that process was run was I ended up converting the canvas contents to base 64, and then I was able to take that string and pipe it into something else, right? So that came back as a PNG, base64. I then ran it through another node module called base64 to PNG. That then converted it to a PNG file and saved it on my hard drive. And I was like, OK, I got the image out. How am I going to view this now? And so there is another node module called PictureTube that I can pipe that into. And then hopefully you'll see some kind of like low-resolution version of the image. And so this is where I'm using headless Chrome. I'm spawning it up. And then the way that I got the sound in was I used the audio file name. I grabbed it from the arguments of the command, and then I ended up making a query parameter that the HTML file could then go and fetch the file locally from the hard drive. Good times.
Is there any choice that you use headless Chromium instead of headless Chrome? Because headless Chrome like recently came out, and everybody's like, oh my god.
Yeah, it's so fancy, but it doesn't run on Raspberry Pi.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So if you could just work on that, and then
I'll get back to yes.
Good, yeah. And so then, what do we have to? Yep. And then, of course, sometimes I would have a bug in my JavaScript, and so the process would just run forever and never exit. So I had to kind of put a 60-second timer on it to just like kill off the process if it didn't end up ending and spitting out my file. Because there was a lot of PS, grepping around to try and end Chromium processes that got hung up, which is not great. Then, just to use the base64 image module, I then just took the actual results that were piped in, and then I was able to then pipe that straight back out into a file path. And then finally, I was able to run the following command. So I was able to chain a whole bunch of things together. And so I can draw the audio with the sound.mp3, take the base64 results of that, pipe it into a file at png.js, take that file that comes out, apply it as an argument to PictureTube. And then I finally saw the picture that Mariko sent me, which was so exciting for me. It was that. Is that what you drew me?
No. I mean, you already know I did.
I mean, if I kind of squint at it, it looks like a puppy a little bit, but I didn't really know what it was. So I thought, OK, the file is on the hard drive of my Pi, so I shelled in and kind of like fetched that file down onto like the hard drive of my regular computer, and this is actually what was drawn in the node canvas. And so that's slightly higher resolution. So I did cheat, and I pulled it down because I really wanted to look at what the hell I had drawn blindly in this weird process. And so I can see some patterns here which are really, really cool. Like you can kind of see bits of silence, and there are like peaks and troughs and stuff. And I thought, it looks like there's some kind of like regularity to what you drew, which is really, really cool. And so this is what she actually drew me, which was the file name of what you sent me.
Yeah, I sent 3 heart emojis and whatever the blink emojis.
Yeah.
And that was a hint. That was like, I drew this thing.
Did not get the hint.
So, but you mentioned an interesting thing, because like, without knowing anything about audio, I was like, you can totally decode this. But you said that once the notes are stuck together and then exported as audio, there's no way you can like extract that.
Exactly.
Track
So if you had layered notes over each other, that kind of gets merged together, and it's very hard to pull out the exact notes and plot them properly. And so that's my defense. But if you look, you can kind of see the patterns, even though it's not recognizable. So I was still pretty proud of like what I ended up achieving through that. But it was very cool for me to ask Mariko, is this what you drew me? And she's like, no. And she actually opened the GarageBand file for me to look at. But there was a really, really cool journey, and I had a lot of fun. And yeah.
And I think that's like a good segue into like what we learned.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
One thing that we got out of it is that the journey is more important than the result that came out of it, especially when you're doing like fun project and trying to learn something. So like the thing I made was extremely simple, of sniffing the file type and just outputting into the browser. That's browser already do without us thinking about it. But the fact that I got down the rabbit hole of researching how that's done, I learned so much.
Right.
And I think I'm really glad that we did this project. And then I think it's the same thing for you.
Yeah, totally. I know how to decode MP3 files now if I really want to, but I'm not sure that I'll ever really do it. But yeah, it was really, really cool. I learned so much because I'm a bit of a paper nerd as well, like Matteo, and I know that you really like reading them too. So it was awesome. It was a good excuse for that.
Yeah. Another one is that like it doesn't really have to have a point. So as we mentioned, like we've been talking about like we gotta do this project together, right? And then like going to meet up and like, yeah, we're doing this secret project together, and it's gonna be so awesome. And then everybody is like, oh, like you're cooking up something big, and like when's the release?
It's like a business.
Yeah,
like, what are you starting?
Like,
Yeah,
it's not like startup.
No, we didn't want to make a business at all.
Yeah. And we went into this project like explicitly saying like we just gonna try to do this. It doesn't have to have a point, and it worked out great. It was no pressures about like, oh, like I didn't send this thing. We're not gonna get the $1 million funding.
It also didn't matter if one of us kind of had to drop out for a bit and come back later.
Yeah, so both of us started a new job in the midst of doing this project, and the project paused for like 2 months.
Yeah.
But like we already had the agreement that like, you know, it doesn't matter, this is something we are doing it for fun on the side, and in the end it worked out. Right? We discovered something that we would not have discovered if we had that tight deadline or a high expectation about what it should be.
I think I also went a lot deeper with the sound stuff because, like, I felt like I had to race it first, but then because, like, I thought that you were going to beat me to it, like, with the first one, and so, like, when you kind of didn't respond for a while, I was like, oh, this is great, and I went into more of a deep exploration. So I feel like it kind of worked out better in the end. And yeah, also just finding, this is kind of how I describe it, finding like the same code weirdo, you know, like the person who is really into the same stuff as each other, like you're weird about the same stuff, I guess is what I'm trying to say, is really, really important. Like, for a while, I really struggled with being a creative coder because I felt like I wasn't like a real developer because I wasn't super into like scaling enterprise apps. But when I met Mariko, I realized that there are other people like me who do code exploration to learn, but in more of a creative skew, and that it didn't matter if what you made you threw out in the end. It was really about like discovering. So that was like really amazing to work with somebody who had a very similar viewpoint.
Yeah, like when I started doing the knitting machine project, the way I described it was like I was doing it secretly on my own, and I didn't tweet or tell anybody about it. And I was at the conversation about the conference organizer, and I was like, yeah, so I'm doing this like a super weird thing, and I don't know if you like it, but like I think it's really interesting. And there was somebody who said, yes, that's interesting. And that's kind of like how we got to know each other.
Totally.
Actually, we met the day I succeeded the knitting project, and I was just, look at this, I made this at a meetup, and then you came speak at my meetup, and immediately we were like, we are friends now. So it was really great to like have, now I can like have like weirdest idea and then just DM you about like, hey, fax machine, and then we can just like totally discuss about it.
I really like being able to DM you with random stuff that would make no sense to anybody else.
We also like not DM and public tweet about random stuff.
Yeah,
our
true.
Conversation is really weird.
It wouldn't make any sense if we screenshotted it. So what's next? We're going to keep sending each other files. We're hoping that eventually over time we're going to be able to share our modules as well. So we're going to, like, we kind of pull requests to the exact same repository. So when she pulls down my stuff, she actually has those parts to work with too if she wants to. So you kind of want to look at like security and stuff, right?
Yeah,
like,
so I got like into this idea of like secret message and then like tightly secured message, and then I learned about like public key cryptography and stuff.
Yeah.
So like it'll be interesting that like I have to physically exchange the key.
Yeah.
And then you have to use that key to like decode it.
Yeah.
So that's somewhere I'm trying to go. And then I think you were interested in doing more hardware part.
Yeah, I'm glad that someone else is worrying about the security side because I sort of want to make some hardware like nodes that you can kind of plug in and out of the Raspberry Pi. So I suggested the Raspberry Pi for selfish reasons because it has a GPIO. So I can create these kind of like slot-in modules that are like screens and speakers and stuff like that. And part of that is because I don't have a GUI, a traditional GUI, so I could like make my own out of like an OLED screen or something like that.
So you can just like put the thermal printer, and then you can literally make fax machines.
Yes.
That's cool.
Yes, I'm pretty excited about it. So just like a really quick thing about like stuff that we work on in our spare time, in case you wanted to kind of catch up with us about that. Every single Sunday, except this weekend because I'm still in Oslo because I'm having such a good time, I do like a Twitch live coding stream at 11 a.m. Most Sundays, 11 a.m. Eastern Time, New York. And essentially, I think of it as massively multiplayer pair programming because you can come in the chat, watch what I'm typing, and say, you got a typo, or you should use like a array.includes instead of like index of and things like that, which is really, really fun. So I hope that you would join me there, because I tend to work on a lot of my open source hardware stuff. And Mariko, you do these really cool drawings.
Yeah, so this year I started to draw more technical concepts, and then like kind of like I draw the diagram and like explain the things that you read on spec text or scientific paper, but more graphical way. Again, I'm like a graphical learner that I have to have like diagram. So I'm really putting the efforts into making more of those. And now that part of my job, explaining things that doesn't make sense to web developer is part of my job, you should definitely tell me what I should draw next, and I will tweet those drawings on my feed.
Cool.
So,
And with that,
thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Right. Totally forgot about this.
I'll miss this couch.
It's so cozy.
First of all, fantastic job on staying chill under pressure. I think I would have been like freaking out. Yeah, please clap for them. That was amazing. And you didn't let it ruin your presentation. I think, yeah, I would have just ran out the door and never come back.
Well,
so.
thanks for hanging in there, because I realized we went slightly over time as well.
No, it was great. It was well worth it.
Yeah, we should have just like prepared like jokes for like in case of technical difficulties.
Yeah, we can do that next time.
Next time, yeah, next time.
Some tweets from the audience. Holy smokes, what a way to end the 6th Web Rebels. Such a brilliant talk.
Aw.
You rock. Someone also tweeted that there's a glorious MIDI unicorn, and then there's a MIDI drawing of a unicorn that you can play. So
I want to check it out.
yeah, it looks great.
Thank you.
The closing talk is so good. Fun and creativity is such an underused way to learn useful computer things. Those are just some of the nice things. There were more.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, I really love the sense of adventure and exploration that showed. We have all these abstractions around us, and it can be tempting to just say, like, I don't know, the computer reads files. You both dove pretty deeply into how things work. Do you find that you approach other things differently now because of that?
I think that I feel that I have more confidence to do that now, because I knew that I specifically had to do that for this, and I couldn't cheat. I think that sometimes giving yourself constraints like that allows you a chance to learn in a way that you never would before, and then you end up having the confidence to tackle more and more technical things.
Yeah, I think like, I don't think I became like because of this project, but I always had the tendency of, it feels weird to use the code that I don't really understand. So like, when I get started, I'll just use jQuery. And then I immediately have a question of like, how does jQuery work?
Sure.
And more and more that I'm in the industry and doing project, I get comfortable reading JavaScript code and like actually knowing what's underneath the package that I'm using. But something like HTML element or like spec was totally out of my territory. It was something in the past I was like, okay, that's something for spec engineers, something that I don't really understand. But like kind of forcing myself to do it because there was no cheating element made me more comfortable and like made me feel more close to what those people do in the standards world. So that was like huge win for me.
Yeah, I love that point, that they're just people and you can talk to them and accidentally make them feel bad. But then it all works out.
I'm so sorry.
No, he seemed really chill about it.
You did.
With every piece of technology, I think, how can this be used for emojis? And I saw the emojis changed that featured in your slide. Is there a web standard for emojis that we could submit pull requests to that are
Yeah,
just
I
like,
want to change the
change
Android
it
ones
back,
Yeah.
please?
So there is Unicode that defines what code points emoji gets,
Yeah.
right? So there's one standard, but then there's no web standard or like best practice about how you should mark up emojis. Like I think Twitter does like a really good job of marking up emoji in accessible and copy and pastable way, but there's no like kind of like somebody who's leading it. Actually, one of my colleagues like call herself emojineer, and like since I got comfortable with leading spec, I just like joking last week with her. She was at a conference together with me, joking like we should start the standard of like how to mark up emoji.
How to convey the meaning of the text description of the emoji, right?
Right.
Like I think my favorite one is like, face blowing a kiss, and that's like the winky face one, and I just love that that's textually described for accessibility reasons.
Yeah, awesome. Well, that was fantastic. It was a great way to close out the conference. Thank you so much
much.
for
Thank
speaking.
you.
Thank you.